The Pale Road. A dark fantasy tale. There are roads in the world that exist in the space between maps and memory, paths that appear only to those who need them most, or perhaps to those whom fate has marked for darker purposes. The Pale Road was such a path, and those who walked it seldom returned unchanged, if they returned at all. The story begins, as so many do, with desperation. Her name was Mira, and she was 16 years old when she first set foot upon the Pale Road. She had not meant to find it, no one ever did, but on a cold autumn evening, fleeing from a mistake that would have cost her everything, she stumbled onto a path she had never seen before, a road of white stone that gleamed like bone in the failing light, stretching away into a forest that seemed somehow less substantial than the trees around it. Mira chose the road. The moment her foot touched the white stone, the world changed. The voices behind her faded to nothing. The familiar forest of oak and elm transformed into something stranger. Trees with silver bark and leaves that whispered in languages she couldn't understand. The air grew cold, but not with the simple chill of autumn. This was the cold of deep places, of forgotten tombs and spaces between stars. And the road stretched ahead, perfectly straight, perfectly pale, leading into a distance that seemed to have no end. Mira walked because she didn't know what else to do. The road felt solid beneath her feet, more real somehow than the ground she had left behind. With each step, the world she knew fell further away, until even the thought of turning back seemed impossible. The Pale Road had claimed her, and it would take her where it willed. She walked for what might have been hours, or might have been days. Time moved strangely on the road. The light never quite faded to full darkness, but neither did it brighten to day. It remained in that gray space between twilight and night, where shadows have no source and distances have no meaning. Other travelers passed her going the opposite direction, though she saw them only as shapes at the edge of vision, figures that walked with purpose toward destinations she couldn't imagine. None of them looked at her. None of them spoke. They were like ghosts, and perhaps that's what they were. Eventually, Mira came to a crossroads. The Pale Road continued straight ahead, but two other paths branched off. One to the left, darker and narrower, descending into what looked like a valley of black glass. The other to the right, brighter and wider, climbing toward hills that glowed with a sickly green luminescence. And at the center of the crossroads stood a figure. It was tall and thin, wrapped in robes the color of old parchment. Its face was hidden beneath a deep hood, but Mira could feel its attention fixed upon her like a weight pressing against her chest. "You've come far," the figure said, its voice like wind through dead leaves. "But the road does not end here. You must choose." Mira found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Choose what?" "Your path forward. The left road leads to forgetting. Walk it, and you will leave behind everything you were, all your pain and shame, all your memories and regrets. You will emerge someone new, unburdened." The figure's hidden face turned toward the right path. The right road leads to becoming. Walk it, and you will be transformed into what you most desire to be, given the power and knowledge you crave. But the price is all that you love. You will gain everything and lose everything. And straight ahead? Mira asked, looking at the pale road continuing beyond the crossroads. Straight ahead leads home, the figure said simply. Back to where you started. Back to face what you fled from. The road will take you there, eventually, though the journey may change you in ways you cannot predict. Mira stood at the crossroads, trembling with cold and fear and indecision. Behind her was shame and punishment. To the left, oblivion and escape. To the right, power and isolation. Ahead, an uncertain return. What would you choose? She thought of her village, of the people there who had known her since birth. She thought of her mother, stern but loving. She thought of Jakob, the merchant's son, and the mistake they had made together, the reason she had run. She thought of the child growing inside her, barely begun but already complicating everything. "Can I ask questions?" she said. The figure inclined its hooded head. 3 questions, as is traditional. Choose them wisely. Mira thought carefully. If I take the left path and forget everything, will I forget the child I carry? You will forget that it exists. When it is born, you will not know it as yours. It will be raised by others, and you will pass it in the street as a stranger. The horror of that settled over her like a shroud. To forget her own child. To lose not just the memory, but the love, the connection, everything that made it matter. If I take the right path and become what I desire, what happens to the child? It will not survive the transformation. You cannot become power and remain a vessel for new life. One or the other must be sacrificed. Mira's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. She had been terrified when she'd first realized she was pregnant, had even considered. But now, faced with the actual possibility of losing it, she felt a fierce protective surge she hadn't expected. And if I go forward, back home, what awaits me there? The figure was quiet for a long moment. That I cannot tell you. The future is not written. Your village may forgive you or cast you out. Jakob may accept responsibility or deny it. Your mother may support you or turn away in shame. The road ahead is uncertain, as all roads home must be. That's not much of an answer, Mira said bitterly. It is the only honest one. Life offers no guarantees, child, only choices and consequences. Mira stood at the crossroads as the gray light grew subtly dimmer, as though night were finally coming to this strange place. She thought about who she had been when she fled the village, young, terrified, thinking only of escape. And she thought about who she might become if she continued forward, someone who faced her choices instead of running from them. It would be hard. She would face judgment and scorn. Her life would be difficult in ways she could barely imagine. But at least it would be her life, her choices, her consequences to bear. "I'm going home," she said. The hooded figure nodded slowly. A brave choice, or a foolish one. Time will tell which. It gestured toward the pale road stretching ahead. Walk on then, and remember, the road gives nothing freely. What you learn here, you will pay for. What do you mean? But the figure was already fading, dissolving like mist in morning sun. Within moments, it was gone entirely, and Mira stood alone at the crossroads. She took a deep breath and stepped forward onto the pale road, continuing in the direction she had been traveling. The moment her foot touched the white stone, the world shifted again. The road began to change. Where it had been smooth and even, it now grew rough and uneven. Where it had been level, it now began to rise and fall, climbing hills and descending into valleys. And along its sides, she began to see things. Visions, memories, scenes from her life played out in the air like theater performances. She saw herself as a child, laughing with her mother in the garden behind their cottage. She saw herself at 12, crying over the death of her father. She saw herself at 15, meeting Jakob for the first time at the Midsummer Festival, the moment their eyes met and something sparked between them. And she saw the night 3 months ago when they had stolen away together, when desire and opportunity had overwhelmed judgment, when they had made the choice that led to everything that followed. The visions weren't just memories, they were lessons. With each scene, Mira felt understanding bloom in her mind. She saw how her choices had led to this moment, but also how Jakob's choices, her mother's choices, even her father's death years ago, had all been threads woven together into the tapestry of now. She saw, too, the choices she hadn't made, alternate paths her life might have taken. In one vision, she had never met Jakob, had instead apprenticed to the village healer and lived a quiet, useful life. In another, she had accepted a marriage proposal from the blacksmith's son and was now pregnant within the safety of a lawful union. In yet another, she had confronted Jakob earlier, had demanded he acknowledge what they'd done, and together they had faced the village's judgment as partners. Each unlived life was a ghost, a might have been, and they crowded around the road like spectators at her passage. The road climbed higher, and Mira climbed with it, her legs aching, her breath coming hard. The visions grew more intense, more painful. She saw herself giving birth alone in a forest, dying from complications with no one to help her. She saw herself cast out from the village, starving on the roads with an infant in her arms. She saw herself drowning in a river, the weight of shame and despair pulling her down. All the terrible possibilities, all the ways her story could end in tragedy. But she also saw other visions, harder to perceive, like light filtered through fog. She saw herself holding a child, older now, healthy and laughing. She saw herself working alongside her mother, the two of them reconciled. She saw herself gray-haired and content, surrounded by grandchildren. Hope and horror intertwined. The pale road showed her everything and demanded she face it all. At the peak of the highest hill, Mira collapsed to her knees, exhausted and overwhelmed. She had been walking forever, it seemed, through a landscape of visions and possibilities. She couldn't take another step. "Please," she whispered to the road, to the strange magic that governed this place, "I just want to go home." The wind picked up, carrying with it a voice, or perhaps many voices, speaking in unison. The road home is never easy, child. It demands you carry the weight of what you've learned. It demands you remember everything you've seen here. Can you bear it?" Mira thought of the visions, of all the terrible possibilities and fragile hopes. Could she carry that knowledge? Could she live with the understanding of how easily things could go wrong, how many ways her story could end in pain? But she thought, too, of the alternative: forgetting, escaping, running away from herself and her choices. And she knew she couldn't do that. Whatever happened, she had to face it. "I can bear it," she said, and pushed herself to her feet. The road began to descend, and with each step downward, the visions faded. The strange forest thinned, the silver-barked trees giving way to familiar oaks and elms. The gray perpetual twilight brightened slowly toward something like normal daylight. And after what felt like both forever and no time at all, Mira stepped off the pale road and found herself at the edge of her village, right where the old mill stood by the stream. It was early morning, the sun just rising. She had been gone one night, though it had felt like so much longer. The village was waking up around her, smoke beginning to rise from chimneys, the sound of a rooster crowing, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds, the sounds of home. Mira stood for a moment, gathering her courage. Then she walked into the village, toward her mother's cottage, ready to face whatever came next. Her mother was in the garden, tending to the last of the autumn vegetables. She looked up as Mira approached, and her face went through a complicated series of emotions: relief, anger, fear, love. "Mira," she said simply. "Mother," Mira replied, "I have something to tell you." And there, in the garden, as the sun rose higher and warmed the cold autumn air, Mira told her mother everything. About Jakob, about the child, about her fear and her flight, and the strange road she had walked through the night. Her mother listened without interrupting, her weathered hands still clutching a bunch of carrots from the garden. When Mira finished, there was a long silence. Then her mother set down the carrots and pulled Mira into an embrace so tight it almost hurt. "You foolish girl," she whispered into Mira's hair. "You brave, foolish girl. We'll face this together. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." And Mira, who had walked the pale road and seen all the terrible possibilities, who had been offered escape and power and had chosen instead the uncertain path home, finally let herself cry, not from despair, but from relief and gratitude and the overwhelming knowledge that she was not alone. The weeks that followed were not easy. Jakob, confronted with the truth, initially denied everything, but under pressure from both families and his own conscience, he eventually acknowledged his responsibility. A marriage was hastily arranged, not the joyful celebration Mira had once dreamed of, but a quiet ceremony in the village church with only close family attending. The village gossips had their day, of course. Whispers followed Mira everywhere. But her mother stood firm beside her, and gradually, as her pregnancy became visible and undeniable, the whispers turned to other topics, other scandals. Life went on, as it always did. 6 months after her journey on the Pale Road, Mira gave birth to a daughter. The birth was difficult, and there were moments when the midwife's face grew grave. when Mira remembered the vision she'd seen of dying alone in the forest. But she didn't die. She fought through the pain and the fear, and when her daughter finally emerged into the world, crying and red-faced and perfect, Mira held her and wept with a joy so profound it felt like a wound in her chest. They named her Eliza after Mira's grandmother. Jacob proved to be a better husband than Mira had dared hope. He was young and often foolish, but he tried. He worked hard at his father's trade, learning the merchant business. He was gentle with Eliza, patient with Mira's exhaustion and fear. They built a life together, not perfect but real, founded on responsibility and growing affection, if not passionate love. And sometimes, late at night when everyone else slept, Mira would stand at the window and look out toward the forest edge, toward where the old mill stood by the stream. And she would remember the pale road, the crossroads, the hooded figure who had offered her escape and power. She had chosen the hardest path, the one with no guarantees. And there were still hard days ahead. She knew that with the certainty the road had given her. There would be arguments with Jakob, struggles to make ends meet, judgment from those who never forgot the circumstances of their marriage. Her life would not be easy. But it would be hers. Her choices, her consequences, her joys and sorrows. She had walked the pale road and returned, carrying the weight of everything she'd learned, and that made her stronger than she'd been before. Years passed. Eliza grew from infant to toddler to child, bright and curious and full of questions. 2 more children followed, a son named Thomas, then another daughter, Anna. The cottage that had housed just Mira and her mother grew crowded and noisy and full of life. Jakob's father died, and Jakob inherited the merchant business. It prospered under his management, and their circumstances improved. They moved to a larger house in the better part of the village. Mira's mother came with them, helping to raise the grandchildren, finally forgiving the scandal that had marked Mira's youth. And through it all, Mira carried the memory of the pale road, not as a burden, but as a gift. When times were hard, when she was tempted to despair, she remembered the visions she'd seen, both terrible and hopeful. She remembered that she had faced the worst possibilities and survived. She remembered that she had chosen this path knowing it would be difficult, and that choice had been her own. On Eliza's 16th birthday, Mira took her daughter aside. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. "A story about the night before I told your grandmother I was pregnant with you, about a road I walked and choices I made." And she told her daughter about the pale road, about the crossroads and the hooded figure, about the visions of all the lives she might have lived. Eliza listened with wide eyes, not sure whether to believe it was true or just a metaphor her mother was using to teach some lesson. Mira smiled. "Does it matter? What's real is that I had choices, and I made them. What's real is that life is hard and uncertain, but we face it anyway. What's real is that you exist because I chose to come home instead of running away or escaping into something easier." "Do you ever regret it?" Eliza asked quietly, "choosing the hard path?" Mira looked at her daughter, beautiful, intelligent, kind, and thought of all the paths she might have walked, all the lives she might have lived. The life of power and isolation, the life of forgetting and loss, all the ghost lives that had crowded around the pale road. "Never," she said, "not for a single moment." That night, Mira dreamed of the road again for the first time in years. In her dream, she walked once more on that pale white stone, but this time she was not fleeing in fear. This time she walked with purpose, knowing where the road led and why. She came again to the crossroads, and the hooded figure was waiting. "You returned," it said, sounding almost surprised. "I wanted to thank you," Mira said, "for showing me the choices, for letting me decide." "I did nothing," the figure replied. "The road shows what is already there. The choices were always yours." "Still," Mira said, "thank you." The figure inclined its head. "You chose well, I think. The hard path, the uncertain path, but your own path. Few who walk the pale road have such courage." "It wasn't courage," Mira said. "It was love. Love for a child I'd barely begun to know. Love for a home I wasn't ready to lose. Love is stronger than fear, stronger than shame. I learned that on your road." "Perhaps you did," the figure said. "Or perhaps you already knew it, and the road simply showed you what was already in your heart." Before Mira could respond, she woke in her own bed, in her own house, with early morning light streaming through the window. Jakob still slept beside her, snoring softly. From the rooms beyond, she could hear the sounds of her children beginning to wake. Thomas arguing with Anna about something trivial, Eliza singing softly to herself as she got dressed. The sounds of her life, the life she had chosen. Mira rose and began her day, carrying with her the memory of the pale road and the knowledge that every choice, every moment was a crossroads. Life was nothing but an endless series of decisions, large and small, each one taking you down one path and closing off others. But that was not a burden. That was the gift of being alive, the power to choose, even when the choices were hard, even when the outcome was uncertain. "The moment I chose to come home," she said, "everything else followed from that." They buried her in the village churchyard, near her mother and father, not far from where Jakob would eventually join her. It was a good life she had lived, not perfect, not easy, but hers, built on choices she had made with full knowledge of their consequences, walked with open eyes down uncertain paths. And if sometimes, late at night, travelers passing through the forest near the village glimpsed a pale white road that hadn't been there in daylight, a road that seemed to lead into distances that had no end, well, perhaps it was just a trick of moonlight on old stone. Or perhaps the pale road was still there, still waiting for those who needed it most, still offering choices to those brave enough or desperate enough to walk its length. But that is another story for another time. This story is Mira's, and it is finished. She walked the pale road and came home. And that was enough. The end.